I woke up this morning with my mind was set on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind, Lord, set on freedom. I woke up this morning with my mind set on freedom. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. I'm walking and talking with my mind set on freedom. I'm walking and talking with my mind, Lord, set on freedom. I'm walking and talking with my mind set on freedom. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. Walk, 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 you gotta talk, talk, 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 cause it ain't no harm to keep your mind set on freedom. It ain't no harm to keep your mind, Lord, set on freedom. It ain't no harm to keep your mind set on freedom. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah.
Welcome, everyone. We're so happy you could all join us this evening for the first Sue Cooter Memorial Lecture with Beverly and Barbara Smith, moderated by Talia Carol Cachimel. My name is Eileen Ryan. I am a member of the Social Action Committee here at First Parish Watertown. This evening is in honor of Sue Cooter, who was the chair of the Social Action Committee for many years and an activist in Watertown and Greater Boston for social justice causes. This evening is made possible partly by the contributions of friends and family members in memory of Sue Cooter. During the course of the presentation this evening, please write any questions you may have for our speakers in the chat function at the bottom of your screen. There will be about 20 minutes at the end of the program to answer your questions. In addition, if anyone would like to remain on the call for about 15 minutes after 8:30, our speakers are available to say hello and for some informal conversation. This event is being recorded for future reference. Before I introduce our speakers this evening, I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered in the homeland of the Pequasit Band of the Massachusetts tribe, in a place they called Pig's Gusset, which means the meadows at the widening of the river. Indigenous people have lived in the place we call Watertown for over 10,000 years. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce our three speakers this evening. I will begin with Beverly Smith. Beverly Smith is seated in the sanctuary of First Parish of Watertown and has been a member of First Parish since 2014. She has been a Unitarian Universalist for 30 years. Beverly grew up during the 1950s and 1960s when the modern civil rights movement was developing and strengthening. Writing about that time, she said, "I knew that something was happening with and for our people." She joined CORE, the Congress for Racial Equality, in 1965 and worked with the SCLS the Southern Christian Leadership Conference on their Cleveland campaign in 1967. The death of Beverly and Barbara Smith's mother when they were 9 years old fueled Beverly's commitment to Black women's health. After receiving her master's degree in public health from Yale University, she worked in public and community health in Boston for 20 years. Women's health was a major focus of her professional and political career. Beverly's twin sister, Barbara Smith, is an author, activist, and independent scholar who has played a groundbreaking role in opening up a national cultural and political dialogue about the intersections of race, class, sexuality, and gender. She was among the first to define an African-American women's literary tradition and to build Black women's studies and Black feminism in the United States. She has been politically active in many movements for social justice since the 1960s. Our moderator tonight is Talia Carol Cachimel. Talia grew up in Boston's Arlington Street UU Church and here at First Parish Watertown. She is an Indigenous and Latinx human rights advocate. She is the communications manager on the When We Fight, We Win team. She is on the board of the grassroots and frontline-led organization, the Truth Telling Project. She is a recent alum of the Fellowship for Emerging Leaders in Public Service at NYU and an Indigenous history contributor for Learning for Justice. New York named Talia as their Young Professional of the Month for her work advocating for, supporting, and celebrating African American heritage in New York City. She's a graduate of Northeastern University and a previous Forbes 30 Under 30 scholar. Talia will now begin our program. Thank you, Talia, and welcome everybody.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Talia Carol Cachimwell, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm an occupant on Munsee Lenape land in the Lower East Side, Manhattan, and I work as the communications manager on the When We Fight, We Win team. Thank you, Eileen, for your introductions. It's a pleasure to be joined here tonight by so many thoughtful leaders from the Watertown community and beyond. It is a true honor to be here tonight with Beverly and Barbara Smith, two founders of the Combahee River Collective. Tonight, we honor Sue Cooter, who is known for her relentless drive in the fight for social change and human rights at large. Before I get started on the rest of my introduction, I would like to take a moment now to acknowledge that today would have been Michael Brown Jr.'s 25th birthday. On August 9th, 2014, Michael Brown's life was taken at the hands of senseless police violence. On August 9th, 2015, my best friend of 13 years, Aviva Jobin Leeds, and I went down to Ferguson with Dr. David Ragland to honor Michael Brown's life. We marched in the streets for days, and Aviva and I still march in the streets for days. I would like to read a message from Cori Bush that eloquently puts together exactly how I feel in this moment. Happy birthday, Michael Brown Jr. You should be turning 25 today. We marched in Ferguson for 400 days for you, and now we're in Congress, working to build a world where you'd never have been taken from us. We love you. May Michael Brown's soul rest in peace, and happy birthday. I've had the pleasure of getting to know Barbara and Beverly over these past few weeks. Hearing them tell stories of how their activism influenced Boston politics has inspired me to continue on in my own journey as an activist and an advocate. But our conversations have also grounded me in the fact that I should never give up on what I believe to be true, even when it feels challenging. I remember reading the Combahee River Collective statement for the first time when I was a student at Northeastern, and admiring how intersectionality was integrated into their demands. I remember thinking to myself as an organizer that I would need to refer to this statement again in the future. Fast forward a few years, and here we are now. I'm so excited to hear more from the both of you tonight, and I wanted to take a moment to highlight a section from the statement that has always resonated with me. As feminists, we do not want to mess over people in the name of politics. We believe in collective process and a non-hierarchical distribution of power within our own group and in our vision of a revolutionary society. We are committed to a continual examination of our politics as they develop through criticism and self-criticism as an essential aspect of our practice. And I believe that is why we are all here tonight. We are a group of people with a vision for our revolutionary society.
My skin is black. My arms are long. My hair is woolly. My back is strong, strong enough to take the pain inflicted again and again. What do they call me? My name is Aunt Sarah. My name is Aunt Sarah. Aunt Sarah. My skin is yellow. My hair is long. Between two worlds, I do belong. My father was rich and white. He forced my mother late one night. What do they call me? My name is Saffronia. My name is Saffronia. My skin is tan. My hair is fine. My hips invite you. My mouth like wine. Whose little girl am I? Anyone who has money to buy. What do they call me? My name is Sweet Thing. My name is Sweet Thing. My skin is brown. My manner is tough. I'll kill the first mother I see. My life has been rough. I'm awfully bitter these days because my parents were slaves. What do they call me? My name is Peaches.
Good evening. I wanted people to hear that song by Nina Simone. It's called For Women. The first time I heard it was in 1966, towards the end of my first year in college at the University of Chicago. My roommate, who was also African-American, got the record and played it on her record player, an old-fashioned term. And at that time, all the first year young women lived in the same dorm complex. So we were already all able to get to each other's rooms easily. When we started playing that song and people started coming by and listening, what I remember is that we listened to it over and over and over and over. And years later, I began to think of this, and I still do, as a Black feminist experience. Now, why do I think of it that way? It was because when we were listening to that music, we were hearing something about ourselves told in a respectful way from an insider's point of view that treated us with dignity. And what that did was to distinguish it from every single other thing that we read, saw, or heard during our first year of college. I used to say that I had never been assigned a book by an African-American writer in college, and then I remembered I was wrong. One by an African-American man. No women at all. And Barbara, I found out from my sister that she also had an experience with this song, and I didn't know about it until we started talking recently. Barbara?
Thank you. Beverly and I were talking on April 29th of 2021, just a few weeks ago, and she brought up what she just described to you about hearing Nina Simone's song, For Women. And on my end, the sound is very poor for these songs. So I hope that you heard it better than I'm hearing it. Could somebody nod and say that it's just me? Because as I said, my sound quality on all the songs that we chose has been poor. Be that as it may, you're going to get links eventually for the songs. And I urge you to do what Beverly just described, play them over and over and over again until you get it. And share something that Beverly and I and other young Black women of the 1960s shared when we heard that incomparable song. Now, I went to Mount Holyoke College, and in '67, a few months, maybe a year or so after Beverly, it would have been a little over a year because I heard it in the summer of '67. I heard For Women by Nina Simone for the first time. And I was working as a resident tutor in a summer program at Mount Holyoke. So as I said, it was the summer of '67, which is a summer also that most of the major cities in the United States, particularly on the East Coast, burned. And I said East Coast, but Detroit burned, Newark burned. So it was a time of urban insurrections. It was a time of great social and political ferment in our country, to which Beverly and I were very attuned, and we will say more about that very soon. But in any event, I was working as a resident tutor in this enrichment program for even younger students who are on their way to the most exclusive prep schools in the nation. And one of the other resident tutors had this record. She was a white woman. And when I heard it, I mean, it's like the top of my head flew off. It was the same kind of feeling that Beverly described. I had never heard anything remotely like it. And I said, oh my God, it's me in a song. It's the people who raised Beverly and me in a song. And I did what the group of young Black women did, who were Beverly's friends. I was by myself, but my friend who had the record and a beautiful record player, she said, you can play and use my record player anytime you want. I don't have to be there. And so I would walk down to her room in the dorm and I would play that record over and over and over again. I think what both of us are describing, it was really so incredible to discover on April the 29th, a few weeks ago. It was so incredible to discover that we had had the same experience. Now, today, when I was playing the song, Beverly, I was thinking like, had we ever talked about the song? Because the song actually, besides all the struggle and all the oppression that it describes, it also ends with an incredible piece of humor. Because the person, who describes herself as my life has been rough and I'm tough and, I'll kill the first mother I see. And then when she says her name at the end, what is her name? The cutest little name you can think of, Peaches. And I swear that I just feel like you and I used to sing this song because Beverly and I used to love to sing together all during our childhoods, and into young adulthood. We would always, sing. We came from a house full of music. And like, I swear that we would say it at the end in the most sarcastic way that we possibly could. My name is Peaches. So I don't know, did we ever sing it together? I don't remember.
No,
I don't know.
that
But
is.
I know I used to love to sing that last line.
Well, the last line makes it because, you talk about paradox or irony encapsulated in one word, because you're expecting to, like, I don't know, my name is, Nefertiti. My name is Imani. Well, of course, we didn't know those names at that time.
No, we didn't have
Maybe-
those names then.
No,
No, we did not have those names.
Nina might have known. But instead, it is the word peaches shouted out. It just is fabulous. But I also want to say too, it just, to me, indicates such deprivation. We would have listened to other music in addition to that, if there had been other music like that to listen to. But because there wasn't anything like it to listen to, we chose to listen to that song over and over and over again.
It's also a brilliant song written by Nina Simone and brilliantly written. And I do remember that Beverly and I used to sing another song of Nina Simone's together, which is Mississippi Goddamn. Now you do remember us singing that, right?
Oh,
Okay.
absolutely.
So Talia wants to ask us something.
Well, I would like to admit also that I've had 4 women on repeat the entire day trying to center and ground this conversation. It's been so amazing to listen to all the song recommendations that you guys have sent over. I'm curious if you guys could speak to what your experiences were like growing up that helped introduce you to activism.
Do you want to go, Barbara?
Yes, I kind of have a stock answer. Well, one of the no, my stock answer is like we were born in 1946 into Jim Crow. That's my stock answer. Do you
Right.
need another answer? Now, as Beverly points out, and I point out too, that not everybody who was in our age cohort, who was born into the same circumstances of being people of African heritage, living in a place called the United States, not every one of those people became serious, committed activists. So obviously, just being born in 1946, in the first year of the post-war baby boom, into Jim Crow, despite the fact that we were living in Cleveland, Ohio, that would not make everyone an activist. So what else was going on? One of the questions that I'm often asked is like, were the people in your family activists? Now, of course, I'm laughing, guffawing internally, like, have you met the people in my family? Well, no, of course not. You haven't. But Beverly has. Beverly has. And she knows that that's kind of a ludicrous question. But one of the things that I do let people know is that we were raised by race women. So even though, they may not have been activists, with a capital A or whatever, that was not even a term that was used that much then, although people did talk about civil rights activists. But even, as I said, they were not involved in going to meetings, every night of the week to plan actions and struggles. And those meetings were happening, of course, all the while during our growing up years and before we were even born. But they were race women. And that's a term of great honor and respect that is applied to both women and men. You could be a race man, you can be a race woman. And what it meant, and it was a term probably, I would say, from the early 1900s, early 20th century. And what it meant is that whoever it is applied to is for the race, and is it's quite clear about what racial capitalism means, what Jim Crow means, and what it means to live under those conditions. So they really conveyed to us what was important about, I think, being Black and about speaking up. The church that we attended, Antioch Baptist Church, I found out in later years through doing actual academic research, was considered to be the most prominent Black church in a huge, huge, huge city. So we went to the church, and our minister, who was actually allowed to be a civic leader in the city of Cleveland at a time when there were very few elected officials, and when the status of Black people was, of course, as second-class citizens. But our minister was invited to come to the city club and give a speech about, the problems of the Negro, etc. He had a very socially conscious ministry in a congregation that was socially conscious, which is appropriate in many ways for what we're doing this evening in memory of Susan Cooter. So I'm not going to say any more. I want to hear what Beverly's thinking.
Well, a couple of things came to mind when you were talking. One is that it's true, of course, that our people were not, activists in the conventional or usual sense of the word. In other words, I have to get this in. We were not Black. We were not Black red diaper babies. Okay. Stop it. But what our people did do and what they were into that I think is as important is that I think they're a very empirical bunch of people. In other words, I was very observant of things as they were happening. Very, to varying degrees, but very willing to talk about things as they were happening. I think of this particularly in terms of our Aunt LaRue, because I think about, she became our parent and our guardian after our mother died. And every so often I think about instances where, some really upsetting stuff has gone down, say with her friends or, something else. She always told us the truth. She never pretended. She never sugarcoated it. She did it in a very sensitive and appropriate way, but she didn't make stuff up. So something, really wild happened and difficult to talk about happened. She figured out some way to talk about it. And I think, what I would say, there's another, what I would call another strain in there too, that I think is important to emphasize, particularly with, this audience and under, this aegis, which is, Barbara mentioned the social gospel. I think that for our family, the ideology was Christianity. So, and that was very, very important. And for many Black people at that time, the ideology for politics was Christianity. And of course, there's not very much confusion over that as the civil rights movement developed.
Thank you both for being so candid and sharing how your experience have come to shape the work that you do now. And I would love to ask a question about the Combahee River Collective. So I think for our audience, it will be great to get an understanding of how and why this collective came to be.
I don't think that we've quite exhausted the question of why we became politicized. So I'm going to try to say a few more things about that. It's really challenging to explain to people who did not live under U.S. apartheid what living under U.S. apartheid was like. As you know, or as you have been informed, my profession is as an academic teaching African American studies and Black women writers. That's why I went to graduate school. Just like Beverly, no books by Black authors taught at Mount Holyoke during the latter part of the 1960s. I did independent studies in African American literature. So I found the books. I had a wonderful advisor. There were no Black faculty at Mount Holyoke, God forbid. And in fact, there are many faculty there at the time who did not think that any Black student deserved to be there, because after all, Mount Holyoke was one of the most elite and competitive colleges in the country. So we were taking up space that, much more deserving Caucasian students should have had. But be that as it may, the reason I mention my teaching is because I was in the position many years ago, have been in the position all my life of trying to convey what is Black experience like, what has Black experience been like, including my own experience and Beverly's own experience, which is often shared and overlapping. What was it like to live in this nation? Now, during this historical period, we see an uprising of white supremacy, unlike any that I think Beverly and I would agree have seen since our early days. And in fact, when the incompetent failed former president, when he was running in 2016, one of the things that we would talk about is like how we did not want to live under Jim Crow again, because we'd already done that, been there, done that. But in any event, the texture of what life was like. So you go to school, Beverly and I, of course, we were original nerds. The word nerd did not exist at that time. We were eggheads. That's what they call, students who like to, kids who like to learn. And so we would go to school, which we loved, and then we would come home and turn on the TV, which was still a miraculous and kind of a new invention at that time. And what would be on television? It would be news reports about Little Rock, about kids who are only a few years older than we were being hounded, under threat, of physical injury and even death. The 4 little girls who were blown to pieces in Birmingham in 1963. Beverly and I were 16 years old in September of 1963. So all the kinds of things that happened. Beverly said we were surrounded by people, and I also said too, people who were very racially conscious. Our aunt, who was a miraculous individual, did not sugarcoat things. And we knew from an early age that there was something wrong. We knew that, as Beverly and I have discussed, that when either the person the white man came to collect rent, I remember that probably is that same person as being an insurance man. Maybe there were 2 white men who came. But the thing is, like, when a white person who would be a man in those days, because women were not out, all white women were not out, having jobs like that, certainly not going into Black communities or any purpose, maybe except for being social workers. But in any event, when a white man would come to the door, the atmosphere in our home would change. We could feel it altered. So growing up, realizing that we were in danger, Beverly and I, we knew who Emmett Till was right when he was murdered.
What happened?
They didn't say, my recollection is that they said that they didn't say, oh, there's a little boy, from Chicago, which of course was a hop, skip, and a jump from Cleveland. There's a little boy, from Chicago who was down in Mississippi, and he was tortured and then murdered, and his body was thrown away, in a river, etc. They didn't tell us that. God forbid they would tell us that. But what I remember, because at that time we were 8 years old, that they said when Emmett Till's name was mentioned, we would ask, well, who's Emmett Till, or what is Emmett Till? What does that mean? And my recollection is that they would say something like, oh, well, he was a boy and something really bad happened to him. So in other words, enough that an 8-year-old could get the basic facts without being so terrorized, we would never leave our bedrooms. So now I think I'm done.
There's something I wanted to say too, because I want to emphasize the fact that we grew up north. We grew up in Cleveland, and some of you know that I volunteered and taught religious education a few years ago here at the church, and we did a unit. We were studying world religions and spiritual practices, and so we did a lesson on the Black church. And one of the things I explained to the students was that I just wanted them to understand that we were up north. We couldn't have been any farther north and still been in this country, because the only thing north of us was Lake Erie and the Canadian border. Yet and still, when we got old enough, our aunt, who my sister mentioned, who was indeed our incredible parent, she worked downtown at the main library in Cleveland. So when we got older, we would go down, and shop and, or window shop or what have you, come to the library, use the library, and then we would go home with our aunt. So that was a nice, outing and thing to do for us. But I remember, I wonder, Barbara, whether you remember this, that when we would come downtown, our aunt would tell us what restaurants to go to. She would tell us specifically what restaurants to go to. And I don't know whether this is exact quote, but basically she said, yeah, go to this restaurant or that restaurant because they'll be nice to you there. Which meant that it was not a segregated restaurant, nor would you be brutalized and called out of your name as a Black child, which is definitely what we were, albeit maybe high school, but we were children. That was Jim Crow up north. That was racism and segregation up north. I'll start wanting to answer. I want to start answering your question, Talia, about the Combahee River Collective and the development of Black feminism. There was something that was extremely important in the fall of 1973. There was something called the First Eastern Regional Conference of the National Black Feminist Organization. And I found out about it because, quiet as is kept, I worked at Ms. Magazine for a hot minute. It was a very New York minute, I guess. A hot New York minute. Wasn't there very long, but I was there long enough to find out that conference was happening. And so I told, Barbara, of course, about it, and she came down from Boston to go to the conference. It was a revelation. It was life-changing because here you had a large number of Black women, including some very well-known and very accomplished Black women, like Alice Walker, for example, who I think we kind of hung out with at the conference. I think you probably knew Alice already.
Yeah, I met her previously.
Yes.
Yeah,
and the person who I remember, I don't necessarily think I met her as such, but who was there was a woman named Faith Ringgold. If you don't know who Faith Ringgold is, you need to find out, because she is one of the premier artists, particularly in terms of fabric art and collage. And she has done some incredible, incredible work, and very political, very involved, in fighting for justice and doing her wonderful art. So she was there, and the conference was a revelation, because what I felt important, what happened for me, is I had found, a place, a location, almost like, that's the word I want to use. It was, I use the word place and location. It was more of a mindset. It was what was in our minds, in our spirits. But I found a place where I felt like, wow, I can actually do some political work. There's a place, that I can do that, because that was kind of up for grabs for various reasons, before that, when I was in college. But you go ahead, Barbara, about what happened next.
The conference was really important. I was teaching in the fall of '73 at Emerson College. It was my first real teaching job, because it was not associated with a teaching assistantship at one of the universities where I was studying. And I was teaching my first course in Black women's literature. And Beverly was working at Ms. I was a charter subscriber to Ms. That's really how I met Alice Walker, because I read that she was teaching a course on Black women writers in Boston in '72. And I wrote to her because that's what people did in those days. There were no emails, there were no fax machines, So if you wanted to communicate with someone and you didn't have their phone number, you actually had to write a letter. And that's exactly what I did. She responded, but that's how I had met Alice. But anyway, Beverly and I were interested in feminism, but it was hard for us to see a place for ourselves in it, because mainstream bourgeois feminism, as it was being defined by white women during that era, just was not relevant to us. It was just not relevant. And being able to go to that NBFO, National Black Feminist Organization founding conference, it was just life-changing. And when Beverly was talking about another person who she met, and I'm thinking as she's talking, Faith Ringgold, she's going to say Faith Ringgold. Which shows you how attuned we are to each other. I said, I bet she's going to say, I hope she says Faith Ringgold, and of course she did. But anyway, Eleanor Holmes Norton was there. Was Shirley Chisholm there?
I don't know.
June Jordan was there.
Luminaries.
That's
interesting.
Yeah, luminaries. Anyway, at the conference, we were told to go back to our respective home communities and to start chapters of the National Black Feminist Organization. We met, while we were at the conference, we met in geographic groups. So I got to meet the sisters who were from Boston, and that was November of 1973. In January of 1974, we had our first meeting of the the Boston chapter of the National Black Feminist Organization. A person came to that first meeting who was totally anti-feminist, a Black woman. She wrote a scurrilous article for a national magazine, which I believe was I don't know if it was a weekly or monthly, probably a monthly. The name of the magazine was Encore. And it was actually edited by the founding editor of Essence magazine, which had only started, I think maybe 72 or 70. I can't remember exactly the dates, but Essence was a very new magazine at that time too, the Black women's magazine. But anyway, this individual came to that first meeting, and she basically destroyed the meeting because she cast so much dispersion. She was quintessentially homophobic. So that was one of her issues. I had not even come out yet at that point, but she was just ridiculous. And some of the women who came to that first meeting of the NBFO Boston chapter, they never returned. I went to Washington in the spring of 1974 to take what could have been a dream job, except that it wasn't, becoming the book editor at a major national newspaper, still in my 20s. That was a National Observer, which was owned by the same company that owned the Wall Street Journal. But the National Observer was, we used to study it when we were doing journalism in high school because it was such a groundbreaking newspaper. It was an actual national newspaper that came out once a week. And unlike other newspapers that have filled that space, I won't mention names, but it was an actual newspaper. But anyway, I got involved in NBFO down in Washington, DC, and then I came back to Boston in late '74. We continued to meet. Demeter Frazier had written to me at my Boston address, and fortunately that letter was forwarded, and she was very interested in getting involved and starting NBFO. So I met Demeter when we got back. Beverly was in graduate school in 74 to 76, right?
Yes, that's right.
Right. So
Public
the
health
thing is,
school.
sometimes she would come to Boston, stay in Boston for a while because of internship and things she was doing. But we were building Combahee during that time. There was such a gap. We started by talking about for women and how it was like the only little, lifeline out there for us. And there was just so little for Black women. And again, just like trying to explain what life was like under US apartheid, it's hard to explain what it was like when Black women were considered to be dirt under everyone's feet. Now, I am not saying that we're still not considered to be dirt under everyone's feet. You can look at the statistics of how Black women's lives go, whether it be as essential workers, whether it be as far as getting like a degree or multiple degrees and making as having people who are high school graduates make more than you do with your multiple degrees, whatever it is, the birth outcomes, the infant mortality and maternal mortality rates. So we're still dirt under people's feet, but we also have people named Beyonce, and just an illusion. There's this, Beyonce's queen of the world. Now, when we were growing up, Lena Horne could have been queen of the world, except for Jim Crow. There's just no social, that's another thing. There was no accepted social interaction between the races in our growing up years. So when you watch TV, if you watch television, or even look at print, publications or whatever, when you see those interracial couples, when you see those biracial children or whatever, when you see Black families, with really nice houses and stuff, there was none of that. None of that. So, and that's what Beverly and I were about. We wanted to change that.
Exactly. In fact, I remember a little television moment. This is probably when we were in high school. And there was something some people might have heard of. It was called the Donna Reed Show. And I think, there was a certain genre of situation comedies at that time that, were family, definitely nuclear families, definitely white, definitely middle class or upper middle class. And they were known for, the women, the families, the wives and mothers doing housework in high heels and shirtwaist dresses. So, it was that kind of thing. But in this particular show, the husband of the family was a doctor. And I remember this one time watching the show, and one of the kids' teachers came over to the family's house for dinner. And I remember thinking at that time, I thought, oh, wow. So like if you're white and rich, which to me, was meant to me, they were rich because the guy was a doctor. So, and we could argue that all day, but the thing is, I thought, so if you're white and rich, what happens is that your teacher might come over to your house for dinner, indicating that you all were social peers. Or at least, as Barbara was saying earlier, you were close enough, or you were in the same social universe enough so that even if the statuses weren't identical for the teacher and the doctor, at least they could break bread together, to go a little biblical, on that. There's something that Barbara said that I would just like to read something that is relevant to. She was talking about that is relevant to what she said. She was talking about Black women as dirt under people's feet. And yes, the beat goes on. But and this is from a book that I have treasured and Barbara has treasured for many, many years. You can see the book is called Black Women in White America. It's a documentary history. I want to show you the yellow pages. Is that yellow enough for you people? For you all? Yellow. It's old. Well thumbed. It's falling apart. I was afraid when I held it up. I said, oh my goodness, the pages are going to fall out. But what I want to read is some chapter titles and document titles that really speak to not only the status of Black women historically, but also I selected things in which it was clear that at least race and sex were operating together. So I'm going to read these titles now. The first part is from the slavery section. And then a subtitle under that is called Woman's Fate. Under that, you have this title, The Breeder Woman. I'll say it again to make sure people heard it. The Breeder Woman. What that's about is the slave woman or slave women who, of course, were bred, that is, in some cases, assigned their sexual partners without any consent on their part. And of course, that was true when the white master decided that he wanted to increase his capital by raping his slave. And if that's not the very definition of evil, I don't know what is. You commit a crime, a heinous crime, and your reward for it is to create capital. It doesn't get any better or worse than that. So anyway, the breeder woman is one section. Then we go on to something called A Woman's Lot. Now this is post the Civil War. And there's a subhead or subsection. Black women are sex objects for white men. There are a couple of documents. These are like specific incidents that happen, specific documents. No protection for Black girls, that's one. And then there's one called The Final Solution. And what gets me about that title when I read it, if I'm not mistaken, and I didn't mention the author's name. Her name is Gerda Lerner. She's one of the first women in this country who in fact developed the study of women's history and in effect, women's studies. And if I'm not mistaken, Gerda, she was definitely Jewish. I'm pretty sure that she came to this country, running from the Holocaust. So I was thinking, what does it mean for a Jewish woman to use that title for a chapter in her book about Black women? Let me tell you what the final solution was for Black women. What it was, and there are about 3 documents in it, I think. These were instances where rape was either a part of lynching. In other words, it was just one of the aspects of the lynching of women, or woman. Or in the other cases, rape was connected in a causal fashion or in an explanatory or excuse fashion for the rape. So for example, young Black woman is by herself in the house. She's about, I think, 17. 2 white men come into the house, just come in and proceed to sexually assault her. She screams. Her brother hears her, runs into the house to rescue her. And that process, there was a fight, and one of the white men was killed. So then what happened is that the next day, a white mob comes back so they can lynch the brother. How dare he try to protect his sister? But the brother, I use that in both senses of the word, or a couple, her brother and the brother understood he needed to get on the first thing out of Dodge. He needed to leave there because he knew that he was subject to be lynched. So he had already gotten out of there, thank goodness. So brother wasn't there. White men still wanted to lynch someone. So they lynched the woman who they had raped the day before. That's what I'm talking about when I say lynching connected in some way to rape. So not a cheerful chapter, not cheerful. And then there's another section also, probably early 20th century, the myth of the bad Black woman. A colored woman, this is a quote from a document, quote, "A colored woman, however respectable, is lower than the white prostitute," end of quote. Try and take that and try and think about, what does that mean? What does that feel like? Because I can tell you what it feels like, because I've experienced it. The rape of Black women as a weapon of terror. That's my last title. So I just wanted to specify that. And I also think it's important that the things that I chose point out what is now called intersectionality. In other words, it points out that there were experiences that Black women were having throughout history in this country and elsewhere that had to do with their identities and their positions as both female members of society, or at least female people around the real society, which of course was white folks, but also had to do with their race. So you had these things happening that could only happen in the context of both their racial and sexual identities.
I think that what Beverly has just shared with you shows why we became committed and staunch Black feminists. And I hope that you heard what she said, because I can say the same thing. The status, the perception of Black women, that a Black woman, no matter what her value system, her way of life, her contributions, is lower, and I can't remember the terminology that you use, is lower than a white prostitute. And that, I mean, there's all kinds of mess up in there, because we know that sex work and sexuality under patriarchy is totally, totally convoluted. And you never look at, you always have to look at first causes. Why is there prostitution to begin with? Could it be because capitalism, and other systems do not allow women to be able to be self-supporting? I mean, is it, there's just all kinds of things. So like the idea, that I just wanted to kind of, take apart that notion of like, that there's nothing worse than a white, well, nothing except for a Black woman, but to say that a white prostitute is a person to be denigrated, that's not anything Beverly and I would agree with. But you can see the kind of trick bag that people like Beverly and I, and there, of course, our names are legion. There are millions and millions of us, not to say, at least millions, if not billions. You can see what we live under. And, we have an international perspective. When I talk about millions and billions, we don't have to just limit this to the United States. And we definitely don't have to limit it to women of African heritage. I mean, when you look at what the US military does and other, armed, entities do in the context of warfare, what are they doing? They're raping women as a weapon of war, and as I said, the U.S. military, the Chinese, I'm sorry, the Japanese in relationship to the Korean comfort women. I mean, the Boko Haram in Nigeria, you name it, we are viewed as being disposable. The disappearance, the rape, and the murder of indigenous women in our nation. So we have, as I said, we have an international perspective. Beverly mentioned intersectional. We believe, we even say in the Combahee River Collective Statement, we say that we believe that what we are laying out in that statement would be useful to all women of color. And when we say women of color, or said women of color, we didn't mean just Black women. We meant all women of color. We knew we were doing something that hadn't been done before by putting our politics out in a very clear way. And Beverly, Demita Frazier, and I are the co-authors of the Combahee River Collective Statement, which is getting a lot of play these days. About time, I would say. But the thing is that,
yes, that is so true.
But
I just want to say a couple of things.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Oh, can I
just want to say a couple of things here. Are you done, Barbara?
I didn't conclude yet. Yeah, I just wanted to conclude. But I was trying to express that we knew that we were doing something that had not been done before, and we saw it as being useful to all women of color, and in fact, to all people in struggle. We were not separatists. We thought, like, if you're woke, the term wasn't being used at that time, but like if you're a woke and ready person, whose gender is not, you're not a cisgendered woman, maybe there's something in this for you. And that's exactly what has happened. We did major organizing in Boston, and I think we're going to talk about that in a minute.
Yes, we need to get to that. I just wanted to say too, Barbara mentioned our collective statement. And I've told a few people about this. I think I know a few people have probably heard me say that. But we had, when we were discussing the statement, right before we were doing the writing, we had a meeting at my apartment in my kitchen. I lived in Cambridge. And so we were, sitting around my little kitchen table. I just want to tell you people, I still have that kitchen table. But that thing, it's a treasure. It's like, I love to be able to point to it, from time to time and say, you see that table? That's the table where we talked about what was going to be in the Combahee River Collective Statement. And that was the table in my kitchen at the time. But there is something that we do want to get to, which is organizing that we did. And Julia, why don't you lead us into that?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you both so much for sharing those anecdotes. We know that the Combahee River Collective had a huge influence on Boston politics. Could each of you speak to the impact or one of the most meaningful contributions of the collective from the time that you guys were at your peak in your activism?
Do you want to start with that? I mean,
okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, I mean, if you want to go ahead, feel free.
Yeah.
Okay. We consider the pinnacle of our organizing in Combahee, which we became independent as a Combahee River Collective. Was it in 75? Because it was really difficult for the National Black Feminist Organization to be a membership-based chapter organization with virtually no financial resources. That was one of the things that made it difficult for the NBFO, to function. A lack of of financial resources, unlike now the National Organization for Women. I'm not saying that the now was rolling in dough, but in comparison to NBFO, and NBFO was very much modeled on now, I think, in its conception of like, we'll have chapters in various cities and etc. But we also were concerned about the politics of NBFO. And
the pictures of the march.
Beverly, do you want to mute Bev if you're talking? Yeah, I could hear you. I could hear anyway. No, I didn't mean that. I just mean just push the mute button. Just push the mute button. But anyway, if you needed to talk to somebody, but be that as it may, be that as it may, we decided to become independent, and also because fortunately we were becoming more and more immersed and familiar with being a socialist and anti-capitalist. Demita had been involved with the Black Panthers in Chicago. She knew Fred Hampton. She had met him just a little bit before he was assassinated. Not very long before he was assassinated, Demita was, working in the breakfast program. She's about 6 or 7 years younger than Beverly and I. So she was quite young. She was with the Panthers. I had been very involved in the movement to end the war in Vietnam. As Beverly, as was mentioned about Beverly, the name of the organization is the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC. So Beverly was involved with that. We were involved with CORE. We had all kinds of political experiences, but we were tending toward the left. And then we had a member who was a very experienced leftist and Marxist. She was in her 40s when most of the rest of us were in our 20s and 30s. Her name is Sharon Burke, and we learned a lot from her. And I hope that our friend Joyce Kaufman is with us this evening, but I had the pleasure of taking a course on Marxism with Joyce Kaufman, who still lives here in the Boston area. And it was offered by one of the several, at least 2 women's schools. We used to have women's schools. We had women's restaurants. We still have a women's center in Cambridge. And we had all kinds of, we had a credit union, a women's health center. We had all kinds of institutions. Oh, let me not forget the bookstore. We had a lot of women's institutions, and some of those institutions were the women's school. So we were seeing ourselves as a part of the left. We also met socialist feminists in Boston, which had a very healthy cadre of socialist feminists because we had a Boston Women's Union in the city of Boston. And there were women's unions all over the United States, and those were socialist feminist organizations. So that was a major political reason that we wanted to be independent. And I always say that the reason that the Combahee River Collective Statement has stood the test of time to this day is because it was written from an anti-capitalist socialist perspective. We were not just saying, isn't it marvelous that we're all Black women together, Black girl magic, blah, 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 blah. I mean, no, we were excited. We were really excited to find each other because we were incredibly isolated during that time and even subsequently, very, very isolated. So it wasn't that we were not excited to meet and see each other and to begin to form a community, even a family in many ways. But it didn't stop there. It was not only identity politics in the most narrow sense. But Beverly, you might want to talk about the murders, or do you want me to continue?
Yeah, I'll start. So it was the beginning of 1979, January. And there was a report of, one murder to begin with of a Black woman.
I think it was 2,
And-
Beverly. They found 2 bodies.
Oh, they found 2 of the
young
same
Black
yes.
women. It's
Okay.
2, yeah. Mhm.
And what happened that, we were aware of it. People from, certainly people in the Black community were aware of it. The bodies of the women have been found in, I think the South End, or maybe it's the South End,
Yeah.
Roxbury border. And so it's an area where there was a large Black population close by, or actually in there. And so, there were that March picture, and I think they'll come back again so that people can really look at it. But that March picture, a picture of a march, that's what I'm trying to get across, was something that happened a couple of months later. Because what kept happening is that more and more Black women kept being murdered. And I think at the time of that march, that you're seeing the image of now, there were 6 murders. Ultimately, I believe the total number was 12. And of course, even if you all responded, I wouldn't be able to know what your responses were, but I know that I think a lot of the people in our congregation particularly were in Boston at that time. We're living in Boston, or the Boston area, in 1979. And for those of you who were here in the Boston area, I'd like you to think to yourself, did you know about these murders? One of the reasons you may well not have known about them is because the way they were conceived of by the media, and at that time, leading media was, the newspapers, particularly the Globe, and then of course, television. They did not see a connection between the murders. First of all, they didn't see that it was important. Let's just say that initially. They just weren't important because, these were like no-name Black women who, on the best days, best day, they were negligible. We were negligible and they were negligible. But because it was not a serial killer situation, there was never a belief among the general public, and of course, and that came from the official agencies, the police understanding of what was going on. There was never really a thought that this is a serial murder. So the different perpetrators were in fact different people for the most part. And that's what the media meant at that time when they would talk about murders that were connection. The connection was if it was serial killing. If it was not, although all the victims just happened to be Black women, then they're not connected. And my favorite media response, I'm being very sarcastic about it, is that there was a person who a lot of you probably still familiar with, know about, Mike Barnicle. He had a column in the Globe at that time. And basically his take was, X number of Black women dead, that's not news. And contemplate that for a moment or two. It's just like, in fact, with the police killings that we have so regularly now, that is killings by police of Black people, predominantly men, but not always necessarily. But it's just like, that's been going on since, I don't know, the flood, after the flood. And then, certainly since we've been here. I mean, we as a people, as Black people in this country, that kind of wholesale murder has definitely been a part of our experiences. But that wasn't news either until it could be documented on by video cameras or other kinds of media that could capture sound and images that an ordinary person, as opposed to a TV station, could operate. These are the pamphlets that we distributed. Why don't you talk about the creation of those, Barbara?
So there was because Boston is such a racist city, and particularly in that era, because it was the time, the 1970s were the time of the school busing crisis. So Boston was as I have written in a recent article about the Combahee River Collective, which appears in the book 400 Souls, which is co-edited by Keisha Blaine and Ibram Kendi. They asked me to write an article about 74 through 79, and they specifically asked me to write about the Combahee River Collective. And the first line of the article, and I'm paraphrasing because I wasn't quite prepared, but I think it said something like, in 1974, this may not be a paraphrase, in 1974, the city of Boston was in the midst of a race war. So the 1970s in Boston was basically a race war. And we were creating Combahee and organizing and developing Combahee in the context of racial warfare. How much courage and how many guts did we have to have in order to do that? Because we were speaking out about racism, we were speaking out about gender, oppression, sexism, and we were speaking out about economic issues and class oppression. And the worst of all, probably, well, near the worst of all, was we were speaking out against homophobia. So, and we were doing that, as I said, in the context of this race war. The pamphlets, which if you could put the pamphlets back on the screen again, I would like to point some things out about them. There was the people were mobilizing, the Black community was mobilizing around these murders, but because they did not have an analysis or a positive perspective about gender politics, the politics of gender, they were defining the murders as being solely racial murders. So we went to a rally on a Sunday, and the speakers were up there talking about the racism that these murders embodied. They said nothing about sexism, and they did advise, though, Black women. They advised us, if we wanted to be safe, that we should go everywhere we went with a man. So that was how. My screen is frozen. Is there a problem? Or should I just continue? No one's saying anything, so
Just
I
continue.
don't know
You're
what's
good.
going on.
I see the
Okay,
photo
good.
there.
Thank you. Yeah. As I said, my screen is completely frozen, but it hasn't. I guess the link has not dropped out completely. Anyway, as I said, at this rally that several of us from the Combahee River Collective attended, they were defining these as racial murders, and the solution was go everywhere with a man so the man can protect you. So I went home to my house in Roxbury, and I was just like fit to be tied. I was livid. And that night, I started writing this pamphlet, the pamphlet that you see or did see on the screen. And the title of the pamphlet was 6 Black Women. Why did they die? The text of the pamphlet was an analysis of this being a racial gender crime, a racial and gender-based murders and crime. There was one panel, the outside of the one of the panels out on the outside of the pamphlet had a list of resources that addressed violence against women, and those resources were completely, I think, with maybe one or so exceptions, they were completely based on the other side of the river in that white feminist community. But what the Combahee River Collective did was to bring together the communities of color, both Black and Latinx or Latino, to bring together communities of color, also Asian American, Asian Pacific Islander, and with people in the women's movement who were predominantly white, although not solely, so that we could actually get to the bottom of what was happening, because they were not solely racial murders, and they were not solely murders that resulted from the gender either of the people being murdered, although some of the women had indeed been raped. But that was the pinnacle, I believe, and I always say this, of the Combahee River Collective's organizing work, because of the fact that we brought together a city that was completely divided and had a city that had lived actively and was still actively involved in a race war. And I could go on, but I know that we've gone over time, and it's really time to take some comments and questions from our audience, who we so appreciate. Maybe there should be a chapter 2 of this.
I
Who knows?
just, there is something I would like to say, because I think, Barbara, you and what you just said started to get to this. But I have believed for some time that the impact of the Combahee River Collective went far beyond Black women, women of color, and even for that matter, women. Let's face it. Because we were very involved in a lot of things. I spoke with someone who we did huge amounts of political work with, back in the day. And one of the things she said that was so interesting, it's hard to explain in a way structurally how we did what we did structurally in and as the Combahee River Collective, because we are a pretty small group. Now we had our own activities, our own projects that we did that were definitely Combahee River Collective projects, say. So there was that, but also the members of the collective, including of course Barbara and myself, we were also involved overall in what was then called the women's community, the women's movement in Boston. So one of the things I would say in terms of the organizing around the murders, when the murders started happening and when that Memorial March came up a couple of months later, in the slide, in the photo, you will see us with our banner, and then you'll see black folks around. You'll see other people around, and you will see a fair number of white women and women who are neither white nor black. There are Latinas there. There are people who I don't know what their ethnicity or race is, but I just want to point out that slide, and you can find this picture online. You can look at it more carefully. You will see that here we are in a march, in the Black community, but these other folks who are not part of that community, don't live in those communities, they came out too. When you look, looking at this, the picture, there are two people on the right, one of whom was a member of the Combahee River Collective at that time, Lorraine Bethel, and then she has her hand over the shoulder of another woman. You can't maybe see that for the slide, but she's Latina. Her name is, well, I don't have to tell her name, but the thing is, I just wanted to point out how we drew people and how our being here rather, raise the consciousnesses of various types of people. We did not have to invite anyone to this march. People knew, they knew it was important to be there. They had their own sources of information. They know they needed to be there and they wanted to be there. And in part, that was because of the work we had done over years. Like I'm looking at a couple of people, and some of the people I first met because the Combahee River Collective became sort of the center of concert production. We produced some concerts of Black women musicians and singers. And some of those folks I'm looking at on the slide we met there. So there was a lot that went on that got that group that you're looking at now to that march. And it was work that went on for years. And I went on too long, so let me shut up. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, all of this is incredible information. I'm so glad that our audience is getting to listen to some of the stories like I've had the honor of hearing these past 2 weeks. I think we're going to open it up to question and answer. I see a really great question in here from Jennifer. The question is, given your experience and history, what do you recommend for your allies to do moving forward?
I would suggest that, well, I don't use the term allies, I use co-conspirators.
I like that.
Because allies that's a little too nicey nice as far as I'm concerned. Not to be, in any way sarcastic, but yeah, co-conspirators, people who may indeed be putting themselves on the line in at a similar level of risk. I think that people who care about the issues that Beverly and I have discussed this evening, the way that you contribute and help, you have to be involved in doing political work. I know so many people who can give you incredibly astute descriptions, even analysis of what the problems are, but they never ever lift a finger to make a material difference in something that I would refer to as the real world. And obviously, not everybody gravitates to getting their hands dirty and devoting their lives to doing what is actually world transformation. For whatever reason, lightning struck, and that's what we've committed our lives to. Not everybody feels that way, but everybody can do something. And we live, I was talking about racial warfare. We're living in a race war now, except it's a national race war. Just recently, I don't know the details of what's going up to the Supreme Court around reproductive freedom, but they say this may be one that takes Roe and destroy it. So, we have our work cut out for us. Violence against women has never stopped. The exploitation of workers, economic exploitation, that has never stopped. The fact that we don't have a minimum wage that is we don't have a minimum wage that's decent, let alone a living wage. The fact that I don't know what to call them. This is not about partisan politics. It's just about reality. That other party, whose name begins with an R, they're wrangling and fighting about the fact that the infrastructure bill actually includes things that people need in order to be productive and work. And I was, talking to the TV this morning when they were talking about how we're about physical infrastructure. I said, yeah, because nobody who's a worker actually needs to be who's driving on those roads that you say you want to fix. They can just leave the kids out on the street for 8 hours a day. They don't need it. They don't need any kind of universal child care. We don't need universal health care, So as I said, the issues are the issues. There's much for us to do. If it's not bringing you joy to be involved, move on and shift and find somewhere else to do that work. But Talia is a great example of somebody who's doing the work. I love hearing, I'm finding out more and more about all the things that she's involved in.
There's something I would like to say about that too, which is that I think one of the biggest barriers that people have, even to just speaking up when they see something wrong that they know isn't right, but are not, I'm going to use the word, not comfortable doing that. People need to, and I'm not talking about super activists or whatever, people just in their day-to-day lives really, and this goes for all of us, we need to learn how to be uncomfortable. We need to learn how to tolerate discomfort. And in my mind, closely aligned with that is that, and this comes out of what happened around this time a year ago, that is the murder of George Floyd, which really galvanized people around the issues of race and racism and police brutality, etc., that people who maybe had not paid as much attention to that as they are now doing. I think that's great, because the more you know, the better it is. I think my sister and I, in our lives in general, we believe that to be the case. It's just, it's very important to like keep, acquiring information about a lot of things. But the thing is, at this point, it's not necessary for an ally or a co-conspirator to know every single last thing about everything that happened to this group of people who are oppressed, and I can't do anything correctly or yet until I know what happened every minute of every year of every century. And I know I don't completely understand. People have to act sometimes, when they don't completely understand. And I would, in fact, say, this is I don't know if I'm being fanciful or not, but to me, it seems like that's what parenting is about. Needing to act when you don't know what's going on. And I mean, it's a perfect paradigm as far as I'm concerned. I mean, from everything I've heard, I'm a theorist, but I just think that it's possible to be effective and to accomplish things when you do not have perfect knowledge, perfect equanimity, perfect perspectives. You can still do stuff. You don't have to be, perfect. You don't have to wait. And maybe you might learn faster. People might learn faster if you stick your neck out there a little, because there'll be people around you who'll be happy to tell you what you said wrong or what you did wrong. Because that's the way people are. That's the kind of people we are. That is to say, us Americans. I don't know whether this has anything to do with national character, but so it might really increase your speed on the learning curve if you do something and then someone will say like, well, that's great, but next time maybe you can do so and so. If you don't do anything, no one's ever going to tell you anything much about what you should do, because they'll just figure, well, this person's kind of inert over here, so I don't see a lot of action. I think
Also, I'm looking.
I'm getting tired.
Yeah, I'm looking at the
I'm not sure whether I'm
time, and I know
making
that.
sense.
Yeah, I'm looking at the time, and I'm so concerned that we're not going to be able to hear what I'm sure are an array of fantastic questions. But one of the things about making political change is that it has to be done collectively. No one has ever changed anything by themselves, if you're talking in the realm of social, economic, and political problems. Now, even in science, there's usually, there's the standout person. I was just talking about Jonas Salk, yesterday, I think, who did not take, he did not become a billionaire based upon discovering the first successful polio vaccine because of his value system. He said, like, would you patent the sun? He was just like, no, I'm just doing my work. And now we're going to save all these people from one of the most dreaded diseases, that people were affected by until he discovered the vaccine. So like in the case of science, sometimes there's one person who looks like they're the person. But even so, there were people who had done science that he was depending upon. But when it comes to political, economic, and social problems, it is only solved collectively and by something called movements. And I just want to say, since I know our time has run out, that the question is like, how did the Combahee River Collective affect the Boston area and the Boston women's movement? Well, maybe I'll say four things. Mel King's campaign for mayor in 1979, Mel King's campaign for mayor in 1983. The 83 campaign in particular that went way to the election, or to the primary, I should say, to the primary. I don't think that Mel King got into the primary in 79. But in any event, people told me, I'd left Boston by that time, they told me, Barbara, so many of the people who are working on Mel King's historic campaign for mayor of Boston, anti-racist, feminist, and opposed to homophobia and economic exploitation, a dream candidate, in other words. They would tell me, I was living in New York by that time, that so many of the people who were working on his campaign had come together around the organizing in response to the murders of Black women. And what was the other thing I was going to say? yeah, this is just a really small thing. The Combahee River affects the entire women's movement, not just the women's movement in Boston.
Oh,
Our politics are politics that people have been able to depend upon and build upon in the decades subsequently, and not just organizing around gender issues. The movement for Black Lives Matter, they acknowledge that they got their politics from Black feminists on the left. So, you know, we've done quite a bit. We did, and we're not finished. We're by no means finished. We may be finished tonight, though.
yeah, we're gonna, no.
You are both by no means, you guys are not finished. And you both are truly an inspiration to all activists and movements on the ground. And I feel so honored and blessed to have been here with the both of you tonight. And I'm going to pass it over to Eileen to close us out. And then I believe we'll have a few minutes of informal conversation after. Thank you.
Yeah, I just
And
want to
thank you.
I just want to say thank you so much for inspiring us to be co-conspirators with you. And if you live in Watertown, there's going to be a vigil commemorating the 1-year anniversary of George Floyd's murder on Tuesday night at 8 o'clock in Watertown Square. It's a candlelight vigil. I hope you'll join us for that. But thank you so much to our amazing speakers, to Beverly, Barbara, and Talia, and to all of you for joining us tonight. I'd also like to thank the entire Social Action Committee at First Parish Watertown. This has been truly a collaborative effort. Thank you too to Allison Hewitt, our incredible church administrator, who's been doing work behind the scenes for us, and to my husband, Guy Holt, who designed the invitation flyer and also helped to position Beverly in the church. And if you'd like to make a contribution in memory of Sue Cooter, you can send a check to the church at 35 Church Street. We also have a Breeze account. Allison, if you could drop that into the chat. This will help to fund future racial and social justice speakers. And for those who want to stay on, as we've mentioned before, just to chat for like 10 minutes or so, you're welcome to do that. I'm sorry we weren't able to get to all of your questions, but thank you again so much. I'm so happy so many people were able to come and to learn more about the work that Beverly and Barbara have been doing for decades. So thank you.
Thank you. Hmm?
Thank
I'm
you.
fine. It's fine. Thank you. Thank you. So now,
How do we know if people want to communicate?
I
Okay.
just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart. That was truly an amazing night for me. I can relate on various levels, and I'd love to talk more with you, Beverly. And I'm sorry that I haven't talked more with you in the past, but I'd like to talk more with you.
well, yeah, to quote Alice Walker, we're born, but we're not dead.
Amen.
She's infinitely quotable, amazingly so.
Yes, she is. Yes, she is. Is somebody moderating this for us? I'm not sure how this is going.
I've set it so that people can unmute themselves, but I'm keeping an eye on things so nothing gets out of hand.
Okay. Okay.
So
And
if you have,
thank you.
I would say if you have a question, just go ahead and ask it and we'll see how that works.
Well, hi, everybody. Hi, Barbara and Beverly. This is Joyce. It's so wonderful to see your faces, even though it's on Zoom. And I hope someday soon we can see each other in person. But I just wanted to thank you from the bottom of my heart. Beverly and I talked earlier this week, and it made me so nostalgic for the 70s. I can't even begin to tell you. So I just want to say thank you. And thank you for all that you do and have done to help make this world a better place. I love you both.
I love you,
too,
Joyce.
Joyce.
And I have to put in a plug. I wanted to say this ever since Barbara talked about the Marxism course she took. Well, what was it? This is more of a tutorial, because I think, I don't remember anyone else being in that class. And I just want to say,
Just you and me?
yes, chronology is very important to me as, a fanatic and as someone who loves history. But I took the course with Joyce in the summer of 1976 after I got my degree from Yale.
Wow. Excellent.
Because there was more to learn, wasn't there?
Yeah, Joyce Kaufman, like there's, well, one of the things that unfortunately I didn't get to say, and during our primary session, our actual session, is that there's a history of an anti-racist feminist movement that virtually nobody knows ever existed.
Mm.
And that's for cause, because the ruling class and the power structure, they don't want people to know that there was this incredibly vibrant movement of women on the left who were anti-racist, like about 99% of them lesbians. Who knew? But but the thing is that Joyce, she was so important. She's a part of that hidden history, the hidden history of anti-racist organizing. And when I talk about an anti-racist feminist movement, I'm including women of color in that. So it was a multiracial, anti-racist women's movement. And like Beverly was talking about how she studied with Joyce after getting her degree from Yale. Well, like even though I graduated from Mount Holyoke, I spent my junior year at the New School for Social Research, which is, as you know, is like one of those heavy centers of like leftist, theory and thought. So I had, I spent my junior year there, and nobody, and that's where I was first introduced to the great, dialectical materialist thinkers, Hegel and, Marx and Engels, all of them, we were reading all of them, and it was terrific. But like when I really learned it, it was from Joyce, so that's all I had to say on that.
Oh, you're sweet. Thank you. Thank you.
Grassroots.
Other questions? We don't even know who's on at this point.
No, we have no idea. Surprise us.
a giant thank you for the inspiration. And Ted Rybeck and Ellen Brodsky here, and asking the question about the expression Jim Crow. Do you think in a generation or going forward, we may use different expressions to describe it that are more descriptive, as in the white supremacy period or XYZ, so that it doesn't end up getting a bit of a pass as given the history of the term Jim Crow coming from the derivation that it did, that is almost quote unquote, it doesn't very clearly state where things are.
Well, I just want to jump in and say, I wholly agree with you, because the thing about Jim Crow, I feel like it never really worked as a term, because it doesn't explain anything. It's an allusion to something. And if you don't know the backstory, there are probably millions of people who are very knowledgeable about a lot of things that have to do with politics and whatever. But the thing is, Jim Crow, what's that? It's really not descriptive. It's reductive. I guess I would put it that way. So hopefully, and I think we'll have lots of material to, to inspire our thinking in terms of, coming up with some new terms, because, the behavior is not going anywhere. I mean, what I mean is, racism, segregation. I'm glad you asked that question. That's very interesting.
You did that tonight with that inspiration. Thank you.
So I just want to say I totally disagree. I feel like Jim Crow is very resonant because it does have historical roots, and people now, like around voter suppression, I hear them saying things like, it's not Jim Crow anymore, it's James Crow Esquire in a business suit. These are Black people saying these things. So like, I really feel like there's no reason to get rid of the term Jim Crow. I think that the term racial capitalism and white supremacy encompass like something that's more analytical But when you have one of the greatest books of all time that actually built a movement, which is the new Jim Crow, obviously that those words work. And the new Jim Crow, of course, is about the prison industrial complex and mass incarceration. And now we have like a vital movement in some part that has been intensified, not even in some part, that has been intensified by the lynching of George Floyd almost a year ago. It'll be a year ago next week. But as I said, like obviously to me, I guess I'm coming at it from like kind of a literary perspective as well as an historical perspective. Why would you throw out a term that has resonance over time? They're Jim Crow laws, that were passed following Reconstruction. That was the beginning of the Jim Crow period. Has the Jim Crow period ever ended? Good questions, particularly when you see voter suppression tactics that are reinstating the kinds of restrictions on voting to specifically Black people that you saw back then. I mean, I don't really quite understand why there's a need to change a term. I think that using various terms like racial capitalism, like white supremacy, there's a wonderful new article that a friend of mine has written, and I won't be able to say, unfortunately, the name of the website. I can find it if I have rolled enough in time to grab my phone right now. But he writes about the concept of the white republic. And he talks about how the United States is a white republic. And the term white republic comes directly from South Africa, because South Africa considered itself to be and defined itself as a white republic in which only white people had civic rights and citizenship rights. So he basically says that's true of the United States too. It's another way of thinking about what's going on here. But I hope that I wasn't being too sarcastic.
I would like to say something. I mean, I literally would want to go back and look or listen rather to the question that was asked, because I was not answering it in the affirmative as if I was being affirmative about the notion of completely getting rid of the term. But what I was talking about was, I mean, language is a code. All language is code. But Jim Crow is intensely coded in some ways. So to have language that refers to that period, that refers to the phenomenon that might be clear. Think if you were a native English speaker. You started talking about Jim Crow. What on earth would that mean to someone who is not a native speaker? And so I was just thinking it really as language. I wasn't thinking so much about the ideology that it conveys.
And just because we're nerding out here, it comes from a song. I mean, it's something like it's something like wheel around something and jump Jim Crow, and it was a description of a dance that enslaved people, not slaves, that enslaved people, I think, were required to do because, of course, we were forced to entertain, our owners as well as, work ourselves to death, on their behalf. So like if you Google Jim Crow, what is the origin of the term? I think that reference to the song will come up. The article that I was speaking about, which is The White Republic and the Struggle Against Racism. It's by Bob Wing, like the wing of a bird, Bob Wing, The White Republic and the Struggle Against Racism. And it can be found on the website of Organizing Upgrade. Very interesting article. And there's some really great responses now because this website, which is for organizers, has solicited responses. So you can do a deep dive into that concept of the White Republic.
Hello. I would like to know where you go from here. Can you hear me?
Where we go from here? Oh,
Yes.
the refrigerator?
True.
Yes,
Yeah.
this was dinner time. This was dinner time. Yes. Okay. So, but seriously, folks, that's something I really wonder about. I wonder about because this has been such a specifically challenging time of a pandemic during a time of intensified racist conflict. The fact that the movement for
ready to
Black
go.
Lives
Please.
is the largest
Take us out.
movement, political movement in U.S. history. Because I think Beverly would agree, as people who were, deeply involved in the civil rights struggle. The civil rights struggle did not hit all 50 states, including states that didn't have really any Black people in them. I mean, when people in Alaska and Utah are coming out and saying that Black Lives Matter and defund the police, that's a whole different paradigm. But the question is, and this is a question that I've asked of political comrades, people who I work with politically, like, what is happening to push the work forward? Because the isolation, that we've experienced right until recently, and still to some extent, that the kinds of things that help with movement building, we were not able to do. I was saying, like, in the late summer, like, if it wasn't for the pandemic, after the summer that we had of incredible, intense organizing, that we would be planning conferences. Conferences that would have happened in the fall or either in the first part of this year. But we couldn't do that. And the Zoom technology and our other kinds of online visual communication, it's just flat. It's just not the same thing as everybody coming to a place. And, it's like who you run into when you're registering in the registration line that makes the conference, So there are all kinds of things, that I think are up in the air. I think that with the current administration in Washington, I think that people are being bought off by I would not disagree that there have been progressive moves made by this administration. But the fact is, it's also a neoliberal administration that is making sure that the status quo remains the status quo. So it's just a peculiar, as I said, it's a peculiar time. And those of us who are involved in activism, we're always asking that very same question that you ask, what's next? I think that with the lifting of the restrictions of not being able to be in contact with people, maybe there will be a real outpouring of the kinds of deep analysis and doing that collectively together in spaces, rooms with each other. Maybe that will begin to flower, as this year continues. But as I said, I think there's a lot of confusion on the left, and that's where I identify,
Hey, I know people are getting tired. Thank you so much again, Barbara and Beverly. It's really time for radical change, right? We all want that. So thank you so much for such an amazing evening. And I hope we can maybe continue this conversation in different ways. I know a lot of people were writing in the chat saying they'd like to have a second session with both of you. So we'll see if that ever happens. But good night, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us again. And I hope I'll see some of you next week at the George Floyd Memorial, and keep working, keep carrying on. We need everybody working together. So good night.
Thank you so
Eileen.
much. Thank you. We so appreciate it. Thank you.
Everyone.